Superman and Lois, Season 3, Episode 4, Too Close to Home. The episode starts out with Superman and Jordan working together to put out a massive forest fire. Superman saves people in an RV trying to escape when a huge burning tree trunk falls on the people in the RV. Superman catches it before it hits the RV. Superman watches the RV drive to safety out of the fire and then drops the burning trunk. Jordan is flying around the fire using his freeze breath to try and put it out. Jordan tells his dad everyone is gone and that they are safe. Superman hears something happening at home with Lois, so he tells Jordan to start with the perimeter and work his way in putting out the fire as Superman flies home to find Lois picking up a glass jar that she broke on the floor. She tells him in a stern tone that he does not get to use his super hearing to keep tabs on her just because she is sick. The next day is the day after her first chemo treatment. Lois doesn't have much of an appetite. Clark has to break up an argument fight between Jonathan and Jordan over a sweater. He tells them not to bother Lois today. Jonathan goes over to Candace's and Jordan goes to hang out with his granddad, Sam Lane. Clark tells Lois no investigating, no writing, no texting, no phone calls, no emailing because it is officially rest day for her. They both decide to binge and watch a show together on TV. Sarah is spending the night at her dad's place, and Kyle ends up having to run interference between Lana and Sarah. Sarah finally comes clean and tells her dad that her mother slapped her. After she tells Kyle what happened, Lana calls Kyle on the phone. He picks up and in a stern tone tells her that he is coming over to talk to her. At his place, John Henry Irons analyzes the construction of the kryptonite hand blaster gauntlets. He goes to the Kent farm and tells Clark that he thinks the John Henry Irons of this Earth, who was killed, made the gauntlets. John Henry now thinks that what John Diggle told him was correct and that there is a connection between Bruno Mannheim and his doppelganger's death. Clark tells him he knows, and he says that he and Lois have been investigating Bruno Mannheim and Intergang. John Henry gets mad at them and says, "I told both you and Lois to leave it alone." Clark tells him that Lois went to see Dr. Irons to see what she knew, and before they can continue the conversation, Lois walks in and John Henry Irons says what they were talking about can wait, and he tells Lois to feel better and leaves. Clark goes to John Henry Irons' place to apologize and to explain more of what he and Lois were doing. Clark tells him that Dr. Irons told Lois that John Irons of this Earth was selling weapons to people such as Bruno Mannheim, and which John Irons says is now true. Clark tells him that he is not the John Henry Irons of this Earth, and that if it wasn't for Dr. Irons, they would not know about Lois's cancer. He tells Clark she was always a great doctor, and he decides to go talk to his sister of this Earth in order to keep himself, Natalie, and Dr. Irons safe. Jonathan goes over to Candace's place, and her father answers the door. Emmett Burgundy threatens Jonathan and then punches him and assaults him. As Jordan spends the day with his granddad, Sam shows him satellite photos of him when his hood fell down for a few seconds when he was helping his dad put out that fire. Sam takes him to a barber shop and says he needs to get his hair cut. Jordan gets upset at his grandpa and disrespects him and gets out of the car and leaves. Jonathan comes home and tries to hide his face from his mom, but his mom sees his face and demands to know the truth about what happened. He tells her that Clark said for him not to bother her today, and Jonathan says he's fine and goes up to his room. Lana and Kyle talk at the house, and Kyle confronts Lana about slapping Sarah, but she also tells Kyle what led up to the slap, which is Sarah calling her selfish, and also that it is Lana's fault that he cheated on her. We see the anger and disappointment on Kyle's face and says Sarah had no right to throw his mistakes in Lana's face like that. We, the audience, can see how hurt Lana is and that she wants to try and make it right. Clark comes home and explains that he went over to John Henry Irons to try and smooth things over, and Lois says he doesn't get to clean up her messes and that he and her are supposed to be a team. Lois also gets on to him for telling the boys not to bother her today. She tells Clark that telling people to treat her different is not okay, and Clark apologizes to Lois, and they both go to see what's going on with Jonathan and how and where he got the black eye from. Jonathan comes downstairs, and his mom and dad talk to him and ask him where and how he got the black eye. Lois explains to him that yes, she is sick, but it doesn't change the fact that she is his mom. Clark says he was wrong this morning to tell him not to bother her. He tells them that it all started a few days ago when his truck got stolen, and they freak out saying, "Your truck was stolen?" Jordan comes in and tells them that Sam wants him to get a haircut. Clark and Lois ask him if they knew his truck was stolen, and he ignores them at first when he sees his brother's eye and asks what happened to his eye. Lois snaps at him and says, "Hey, you heard your father, answer him." He tries to act like he doesn't know anything, but they see right through it, so they all have a family discussion about all the things that have been going on. Clark hears Sam at the DOD calling him, and Lois tells him to see what is happening while she deals with the boys. At the DOD, Superman and Sam walk into the command center room, and Sam has the room cleared out. He tells Superman that the blood that Mannheim has came from the DOD. He tells Superman that they took his blood when he was hospitalized after Allie Alston attacked him. Sam said they took his blood to try and save his life. Superman gets upset and asks what they have been doing with it since, and Sam says he doesn't know. Kyle returns home to his apartment and is upset at Sarah and says to her that you didn't tell me the whole truth, and he also says she had no right to weaponize his affair and throw it back in her mom's face. He says he knows Lana slapping her was wrong and that she wants to apologize. Sarah doesn't know what to think, and Kyle tells her about the night of her suicide attempt and that it was Lana who found her. Sarah says everything has changed, and he tells her not to judge her mom so hard. In Metropolis, John Henry Irons finds his sister of this Earth, and he meets her and tells her he is not her brother. He is from another Earth, and he tells her he is friends with Lois Lane and he needs to know about her brother of this Earth. She tells him that she has nothing to say, and he begs for her help so he can keep himself, her, and Natalie safe. She tells him what happened and after he left the service and what he got into and how it all ended. As she leaves, a black SUV pulls up and one of Mannheim's men rolls down the window and says, "Mr. Irons, my boss would like a word with you." John asks who his boss is, and the guy says, "You know." So John gets in the car and rides with them. Back at the farm, the boys explain everything, and Lois can hardly believe what she is hearing. Lois confronts Jonathan on who hit him, and this time she is demanding an answer. So he reluctantly tells her it was Candace's dad, Emmett Burgundy. Lois drives with the boys over to Emmett Burgundy's house and confronts him about hitting Jonathan, and he tries to intimidate her and the boys with a gun, but she gets right up in his face and says, "Stay away from my family," and leaves with the boys. Lois and the boys get home, and it is dark, and the boys start to head up to their rooms when they notice something is not right with Lois. We hear her heart beating extremely fast, and her legs come out from beneath her, and she falls to the ground on her knees. The boys race to her and grab her. She catches her breath and says she's okay. At the DOD, General Sam Lane and General Hardcastle show Superman a top-secret freezer storage vault where several vials of Superman's blood is stored. He tells them, "Both you should not have kept my blood without telling me." General Hardcastle tells him they kept it in case they ever found themselves in a similar situation, such as when he was attacked by Allie Alston. Hardcastle tells Superman that they haven't used his blood for anything else. Superman then uses his laser heat vision and destroys all the vials containing his blood and leaves. John Henry Irons is taken to Bruno Mannheim's place and shown photos of John Henry Irons in his suit helping Superman, and one photo of him and this Earth's version of his sister when John Henry Irons spoke to her earlier in the day. The last picture he looks at is a picture of his sister of this Earth tied up and in a van with a bomb strapped to her. John Henry Irons demands to know where Darlene is, and Mannheim tells him to walk away. John presses a button on his watch and we see it activate. John Henry tells Mannheim to go to hell, and he runs and jumps out of a high-rise window, and when he jumps, his suit assembles onto him and he flies off to find Darlene. He tells his AI to scan Metropolis and for it to look for the same plasma explosive he had in his ship when he arrived. John's AI locates Darlene and tells him that she is in a parking garage, which he finds, and his AI tells him he only has 30 seconds before it detonates. John finds the van and tears off the back of the doors, and then comes out of his suit and is able to disarm the bomb right before time runs out. Darlene is relieved and jumps out of the chair and hugs John Henry Irons as she is crying and thanking him for saving her. John Henry Irons flies back to Bruno Mannheim's place and grabs him by the throat. Irons says to him, "I should kill you." Mannheim responds and says, "You won't, because I know all about your family." He tells him he knows about his family in Metropolis and in New Orleans. He tells John Henry Irons that he will fly out of there and never come back, and that if he sees him or his war suit again, that he will find out what kind of man he really is. so John Henry Irons backs off and then flies off home. Lana, Kyle, and Sarah all go to talk things out at the diner. Kyle starts by telling them both that they all need to talk this out and find some common ground. Lana goes first and Sarah hears Lana out. Lana explains herself and apologizes to Sarah, and Lana tells her what she did was wrong and that she wishes she could take it back, but she says she can't, but she tells her that she wants a chance to make it right with Sarah again. Sarah starts up and tells Lana she is sorry for what she said to her, that she didn't mean it and she only said it to try and hurt her. She tells her mom she knows what she said isn't true at all. Clark comes home and finds the boys and Lois in the family room, and Clark asks what is wrong. Jonathan says that Mom isn't feeling good. Lois says she's okay, she just exerted herself too much today. Clark finds out that Candace's dad is the one who stole Jonathan's truck and hit Jonathan. Jordan tells Clark that he threatened Lois with a gun, and Lois says it's fine, that she handled it. We, the audience, see Clark's anger emerge, and he starts towards the front door. Lois tells him that this is not a job for Superman, and he turns around and looks at her and says, "Oh, he's not going." Clark comes to the diner to find not just Lana, Kyle, and Sarah there, but Emmett Burgundy as well. Clark asks him to step outside several times. Clark finally says to him, "I know it was you who stole my son's truck, hit him in the eye, and threatened my wife with a gun." Clark says, "You and I are going to step outside," and Emmett tells him he's not going anywhere. Clark says to him that I would rather not do this in front of your daughter. Emmett gets up and tries to attack Clark and pushes him, but Clark doesn't budge a centimeter. He throws a punch at Clark, and Clark grabs it and blocks it and slams his head down on the counter hard. Clark leans down while holding him down and says, "If you ever threaten my family, take something that isn't yours, or sell another dangerous drug, that I will find you." He lets him up and tells him that his wife Lois Lane will expose who you really are, and you will go to prison for a very long time. He then tells him to leave, and Emmett runs out of the diner scared. Clark apologizes to everyone for disturbing their meal. Clark tells Candace that he is sorry she had to see that. She asks if he really hurt Jonathan, and Clark tells her yes. She asks Clark if she can ride with him to see Jonathan, and Clark says sure. Back at the Kent farm, they decide that Candace can stay with them until she finds something more permanent. The next morning, Lois's appetite returns and she eats a good breakfast. Jonathan drives Candace to work. Lois and Clark talk to Jordan about the way he talked to Sam the other day, and they tell him that he is going to apologize and then go get his hair cut. Jordan agrees to their terms. Later on, Jordan apologizes to his grandfather, and Sam accepts his apology. Sam says, "Instead of getting a haircut, I have something for you," and he gives him a gift, his very first super suit, and also gives him his great-grandfather's flight goggles. Jordan just doesn't know what to say and is thankful to him, and they both decide to go fishing. Lois and Clark visit John Henry Irons and apologize to him for investigating his doppelganger and for going to his sister. He tells them that Mannheim found him because he talked to Lana, not because Lois visited Darlene. Lois decides to have her chemo treatments at Bruno Mannheim's hospital in Hobbs Bay in Metropolis. That way she can get the best treatment and investigate what he is up to. At his place, Bruno Mannheim sees Lois's paperwork and decides he's going to find out what she is up to. That is how Superman and Lois, Season 3, Episode 4, Too Close to Home, ends. Well, again, we have another episode in the books. I'm going to start off by saying that this wasn't a great episode, it was just a good episode. This was more of a drama-filled episode. It really didn't have that much action in it. This episode was very dialogue-heavy, so you have to pay attention. And there were some boring moments in it as well. When there were action scenes, they did not hold back at all. I love how the episode opens with Superman saving people from a huge forest fire and then putting it out with Jordan's help. That was an exciting opening, I thought. I also enjoyed the scenes and sequence of John Henry Irons rescuing Darlene, but the best scene of the episode was when Clark went to the diner and put the smackdown on Candace's father for hitting Jonathan and pulling a gun on Lois. One thing you don't ever do is piss off Superman. I'm glad Clark was able to control himself and not show any of his powers, but use enough strength to put that asshole in his place. This particular scene reminded me of the second diner scene at the end of both Superman 2, the theatrical cut, and Superman 2, the Richard Donner cut, when Clark goes back to the diner after getting beat up by the bully when he gave up his powers, and he literally put that asshat in his place and made him pay for what he did to him the first time. There's a scene like that as well in Zack Snyder's 2013 film Man of Steel, in which Clark is getting humiliated by a bully who is hassling a female waitress. Clark doesn't get revenge on the bully himself, but he definitely sends him a message after he destroys his logging truck. So this scene in Superman and Lois had some callbacks to Christopher Reeves and Henry Cavill's Superman iterations, which I really enjoyed. One thing I didn't write down that I really enjoyed was when John Henry Irons suited up after being brought to Bruno Mannheim's place. He gets away from his men and jumps out the window and calls his suit, and his suit assembles on him. That sounds really familiar, doesn't it? If you think back to the first Avengers movie, when Loki threw Tony Stark out of the top of Stark Tower, and Stark called his suit to assemble on him right as the Battle of New York got started. So yeah, there's a little throwback or tribute to the Avengers right there with John Henry Irons. I liked it. I was glad to see that Kyle, Lana, and Sarah are all trying to clear the air and meet on some common ground. I do think that Sarah had no right to throw Kyle's mistakes in Lana's face, but I do think that Sarah deserved that slap because she was being a little bitch to her mom. If I was her dad and she smarted off to me like that, she would be picking her teeth up off the floor. But hey, I'm old school, and if I'd have done that to my parents, it would have been bad news for me, and I would not have been able to sit down for probably a month. One thing that all the iterations of Superman has showed us, and this one is no different, is how Lois Lane is absolutely fearless. She's not afraid of danger. I love how she stood up to Candace's dad. I mean, she has some balls. Elizabeth Tulloch's performance is just awesome, and she is an awesome Lois Lane. I'm glad to know where Superman's blood came from, and that once the DoD showed him that they had his blood, I'm glad he decided to destroy it with his laser heat vision. But now, since Bruno Mannheim has Superman's blood, that must mean there is a mole somewhere within the DoD, or at least that is my thinking anyway. It kind of feels like we're going on a plot like from the hit Fox TV show 24 that starred Kiefer Sutherland as CTU agent Jack Bauer. I'm really anxious to see where all this leads and how Lois, Superman, and John Henry Irons will be able to stop Bruno Mannheim with what he's doing. And I'm still wondering what all of this has to do with Smallville and former Smallville Mayor George Dean. Hopefully we will get answers on that soon. I love how loving and compassionate the Kents are, and that they graciously open their home to Candace to stay with them until she finds something more permanent. Also, since Jordan got a new super suit from his grandpa, I can't wait to see him fully dressed in it. Hopefully, in the next episodes, we will see him wearing it and get a good view of it and what it looks like. Okay, that's all I have to say for this episode, so now it's grading time. I'm going to give Superman and Lois Season 3, Episode 4, Too Close to Home, an A-. Here are my final thoughts. Okay, so the grade I gave this is not the highest, but it's still in the A's. I gave the episode this grade because I just felt there was too much drama in this episode, and that this episode was very dialogue heavy. I mean, yes, every episode has lots of dialogue, but I felt this one was just overly saturated with dialogue. There were a couple of times during the heavy dialogue scenes I got bored, and I was just like, okay, this could have been cut down a lot. I was like, okay, let's go, get on with it. But not every episode is going to be great, and that is okay because it still did move the story along. But it's not a bad episode, it just could have been a lot better, and they could have cut out some of the dialogue and it still would have made sense. Okay, that's it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. I'm going to say good night, God bless, I love all of you, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.